Set 7 is finally out in the English format, and it's time to take a slightly belated look at what the meta ended up being for this set. And honestly, it feels like it's a pretty distant memory for me here in Japan, because after the set came out on September 30th in Japan, we basically, after 3 weeks, got the Monster Strike Volume 2 set, which unfortunately ended up kind of shifting the meta to a very bad state because of one of the decks that is in there called Ebisu, but that's another topic for another video. The set 7 meta in itself is actually really good, and while Youthberk definitely feels like it's sort of the top deck that rose to, greatness from this set, a lot of decks are actually quite good, and some of the other decks that were previously decent got some nice support, or just got a better placement in this meta due to how it shifted. Now keep in mind, we're not going to be talking too much about the decks that we were already featuring from the set 6 meta that have not changed. So things like Mahar and Prison and Gravidia, those lists haven't really changed whatsoever going into set 7, and therefore there's not going to be much to talk about, so we're going to be skipping over those. If you want an example deck list, you can just check out the set 6 meta video instead. So starting off for the set 7 analysis, we're going to go through Dragon Empire first, and here we're going to be taking a look at 2 Jiva lists that topped. The deck logs that I will link and show for these decks will all be in Japanese because I want to keep the original deck log links from the people that topped with them, and all the tops that we collected for this video are from the WGP season. So basically these are all WGP events, and so it is official Bushiroad tops only. So the first list is going to be a Jiva deck from Kai T, who got top 8 in WGP Osaka. Now this list is actually the kind of Jiva list that I personally think is a bit better myself. This one is really just going ham on just prioritizing the 2 crossover dresses that you choose to run that actually bring you closer to winning the game. So the Power of Arena, of course, is the kind of strong retire option with big power that you restand with Jiva, and then the new addition of Ball of Arena is essentially just a drive checker on rear, which you're really just committing to in this deck. So you're choosing to just kind of focus on it, you have the removal skill of it too, and basically your CB is a bit limited because you need CB1 for his effect and CB1 if you want to restand it with Jiva. So you kind of just think about whether you want to use which skill. Oftentimes you kind of just go for the drive checks to apply pressure to your opponent to get them to 5, and then after that the drive checks are not as important as the multi-attack. The inclusion of the Togachirashi is also very nice because it helps generate soul in order to use Ball Arena's skill to keep soul blasting to retire your opponent's cards. Now a list that is a bit less all-in is by Rion, who got top 4 in WGP Osaka with Jiva, and this deck you can see is a lot more diverse in terms of the crossover dress lineup. So you can see the Arcs is in here as well, and some of the crossover dress players that I've run into in tournaments that still play the deck now, even in set 8 meta, and do pretty well, are running some copies of Arcs, and their lists look a lot more like this. God of Arena is still a really strong guard restrict, and in my opinion one of the best Varinas in the deck in general, but still including some Bar Varinas is pretty good simply because it is that drive check pressure. And I think the addition of the Urubago, which is the prayer dragon that allows you to basically CB1 when you turn it into an original dress to countercharge, not countercharge, that'd be really good, to soul charge 1 and then retire an opponent's rear, is really nice because you essentially get to do this no matter which Verina you go into, so it's a card that's going to be good going into the future as well. Up next we have a Buff Sagara list by Kote, who got 3rd place in the Sapporo Fighters League. So there are a few new things in this deck that have changed a little bit, and the biggest addition to Buff Sagara is the Samadhi. So this is a grade 1 that is essentially a 13k consistently as long as you have 2 or more equips on your Vanguard Circle, and when your Vanguard Circle has an equip on it, at least one, you can retire it from rear to choose one of your arms from drop or from hand and arm it to your Vanguard. And if you did, then you can no longer arm your Vanguard anymore for that turn. So this is really good because you can basically cycle the spear from your drop all the time to keep drawing every single turn, and then Buff Sagara can revive this thing so you can just keep doing this every turn to just keep drawing cards. So it's honestly a really, really great addition and makes Buff Sagara a lot better. We also see a couple Silent Crows being played here, so this thing basically gets plus 5k when it's played by a card's ability on rear, and if your opponent gets retired, or your opponent's rear gets retired by an ability in the same column as this unit, you can CB1 to draw a card as well, so it just helps to build more hand advantage if you need it. On top of all the removal that this deck has. When you really think about it, it's only the spear that draws cards, so being able to repeat that with the new grade 1 as well as Silent Crow now drawing extra cards is going to help to keep that big bulky hand that Buff Sagara is known for. And the final deck that we show for Dragon Empire is going to be Tamayura, so this is with the inclusion of the brand new Broken Toys order. That order is really good. Basically lets you check top 7 for a Ririmi and Rarami named cards, and then you can choose either from your drop or from that top 7 Ririmi and Rarami and put them into your soul, and then if you have both of them in the soul, you can draw 1. So it's a searcher, it thins the deck, it recycles stuff that you soul blasted, and it draws you cards, and it's only going to get better in set 8 as well. And this deck is actually a little bit interesting because it runs the Elba, who is a grade 2 promo from way back, which supports the Blaze Maiden. So you can basically make it so that you give yourself Persona right on turn 3 by counterblasting 1 and then resting 3 Blaze Maiden rearguards, which is basically your entire trigger lineup. So that's really nice because the turn 3 is where this deck is really lacking in power, and so that helps to kind of compensate for it. Of course, it does cost CB, which, you know, is not too bad, I guess, for current Tamayura, but will be a little bit more scarce going into set 8. But this is a pretty interesting deck that I've run into in tournaments as well. Moving into Dark States, we're going to show off, of course, everyone's favorite Jeweled. So this one was built by Pulse, and they got top 8 in the Miyako Cup. And this is kind of the list that was shown off at the Trail Vanguard site that essentially is pretty flexible in terms of what it's trying to do. The must-have cards are essentially the Rockagur in order to make sure you have multi-attacks. The Falcate Performer is a really important card to keep making sure that you have the 4 soul every turn for the Jewel's effect. Brainwash Swirler, of course, this is the deck that started to make Brainwash Swirler go up in price until Chronojet started needing it too. Power Gem Dragon is one of the newer additions that lets you just consistently kind of like search through your top cards and then add cards to hand and soul, which is really nice because it helps to build hand and also make sure that you can use a Jewel every single turn. And then the removal option is the Ristal Galer, so it's actually really nice because you just kind of put a card from hand to soul, you draw a card, and you pop an opponent's rear. So it's honestly very nice. It almost feels like it's free because you want to be putting stuff into soul in order to set up for Jeweled every turn. So honestly, this Jeweled list is really good, and definitely recommend trying out this list in tournaments. And then the final Dark States deck that we're showing, because we're not going to be repeating any of the older decks that haven't changed from set 6, is going to be Barrow Magnus, which did get some support in this set, but not really that much. You're basically playing a couple of the 2 new order, and then you're playing the Lilac Rusher, which is the grade 2 that gets plus 2k power for every card in your soul, as long as you have a Barrow Vanguard when it attacks, but it's only 2k power on Rearguard Circle in its base power, so that's also quite a big drawback that you have to keep in mind. And so this barrel list was by Ramen Hercules, which was from the first place team of the Amagasaki Cup. Now for Brandt Gate, I'm still going to do an all decks video where we're going to show off the CEO, Mr. Welstra, but the only deck from Brandt Gate that actually is worth showing here, because everything else hasn't actually changed. Eva stays the same in set 7, just changes fronts into draws, and then essentially Prison stays more or less the same with some text that you've always seen, and a lot of decks just kind of are the same, so it's not really worth showing them. But the one deck I want to feature is Orphist, and this is Puddy-Oji's Orphist, and this deck is not really that different from the set 6 version, right? There's no technically new cards, it's all the same, 4 combined rusher, you know, Nouveau Rare is a card from set 6 too, but Puddy-Oji got second 3 times with this deck throughout the WGP season in set 7 meta, Chronojet meta, as well as Ebisu meta. So honestly, being able to do that with Orphist is incredible, and being able to come second 3 times kind of hurts because you're this close from first each time, but honestly, it's an amazing feature. And he also has a deck profile and shows off the deck in action on the Gamers Dogma channel, so you can check that out. I just really wanted to feature this deck because it's crazy to do that well with Orphist in 1 season. Moving on to Keter Sanctuary, and this is probably the section of the video that you all clicked on this video for, because of course we're going to be talking about Youthberk. And we're going to start off with a very cookie cutter type of Youthberk build that I'm sure everyone has seen before. This one is by Ramos, who is from the winning team of the Sapporo Fighters League, and as you can see, this is, in my opinion, the most cookie cutter typical Youthberk list that you can find that you will have great success with because it just does everything really well. 4 copies of Youthberk Tempest because it is the best new card that is added to the deck. Lets you remove your opponent's cards and buffs up your field, which is actually pretty big. That part of the card is oftentimes undervalued, and honestly, it is really strong to give that plus 5k because it makes guarding a lot more difficult against the kind of boards that this deck builds. Schneisel also gets a lot better with the addition of Tempest because now that 18k Tempest becomes 23 or 28 depending on your Schneisels, and it's just overall pretty annoying. The other big addition is Sequana, which of course allows you to have a drive check on all of your revolve forms and twin drive on your Gust, which is really annoying. So as long as the Youthberk player always has Sequana in play, the revolve forms will always have a lot of pressure. And then the must-have 4 copies of Wayward Therapy Angel, the 10k base grade 1 that when discarded, if you're on a grade 3 Vanguard, lets you Soul Blast 1 and then call it the back or rearguard circle. So this works when you ride into grade 3 by discarding for the right deck. This works when you discard it for the Youthberk grade 3 skill. This works when you discard it for Tempest's skill as well. This works when you discard for Gust's skill as well by being able to just produce itself as a back row booster immediately, even behind the Vanguard if you want to just replace the Sequana from before. The deck is just really strong. It doesn't need any draws because you're plus enough, and it runs non-effect crits because you actually want to call down the crits pretty often or not pretty often, sorry, that's an overstatement, but you do call down the crits sometimes because they're going to be boosters to your revolve forms and your Youthberks in general, because a lot of times your endgame boards will just look like Wayward Therapy plus a Youthberk in front of it because you're going to be starting to run out of grade 2s. Another type of Youthberk build we see here from the second place of the Sapporo Fighters League by Shironeko is running 1 copy of the Ride. So we saw this from Joshua Rakesh, who actually topped with this variant of the deck in Malaysia, and Ride is really an interesting card where you can Soul Blast 2 not once per turn, and for that turn, all of the triggers that you get in drive checks get plus 5k power. So if you Soul Blast, let's say 4 for this effect, then they get plus 10k. If you Soul Blast 6, get plus 15k. So basically when you go past turn 3, Youthberk ends up with a lot of soul that you don't really use up whatsoever, and so basically being able to just blast it all out for Reedy, and once you know that you're compressed and you're going to be checking a lot of triggers, that makes your turns way more lethal, and so that is also a really good addition. Youthberk does have some space in terms of like reducing some Frides in order to play some copies of things like the Maple, and nowadays people put in even like 2 Maples, and as you can see here, the Gusts are also reduced to 3 oftentimes because you just kind of don't need to go into Gust as many times as you think because it will just lead the deck out. So honestly, you kind of go into it like twice per game at most because you just don't want to deck out. However, Youthberk is not the only Keter Sanctuary deck we're going to be talking about because Bastion also got some support, and of course keep in mind that this was before the Dark Strain gets unrestricted, so post-restriction of course this list will change because, you know, that card is free now. But the newest addition to Bastion is the Onataria, and she's a really good card because essentially she's like a mini Olden and a mini Dark Strain, where she's, when placed on rear, she can cost 1 to choose a grade 3 from hand and call it, and then if you did and you have 5 or more units on the board, you draw 1, which is very nice, and then if you have 6 or more units on the board, she also gets boost. So a booster, a ability to draw cards, especially when you get damage denied, to not use your Olden is also going to be very cool, and the list also runs a couple of the, you know, form up Chosen Knights, which lets you just do 4 drives on your Bastion Prime, which is going to be pretty good, and overall the deck is just pretty solid, right? Even runs 1 copy of that like interesting guard restrict kind of card, the triple rare from set 7 that you can also mess around with. And the final Keter deck that I want to show again here is Thegria. So Thegria, we haven't actually shown on one of these meta breakdowns before, but she's a pretty decent deck that gets even better in set 8 actually. But I know in the West especially, this deck tops quite a lot, but this is one of the Japanese lists that has been seen running around. Runs quite a few cards that work off of being discarded, which of course, you know, Thegria is doing. So you have the Menacing Tiger, which of course calls itself when discarded and lets you give your Vanguard plus 5k power as well. And Assalta, when she is, either put on a rearguard circle or discarded from hand, lets you choose one of your back or rearguards and stand it, which of course works quite nicely with the Light Thegria, which restands your front row attackers. The main feature, of course, of this deck is that we have the new promo order, which basically says that if you have a Thegria Vanguard, you can play it, and then in the order zone, it's a continuous skill where, as long as you have a Thegria Vanguard, your Persona Rides draw 2 cards instead of 1, and the power increase of your Persona Rides is 15k instead of 10k. But keep in mind, this only works once, it does not stack, so you cannot really play multiple copies of these in the order zone, or like you can, but the effects won't stack. So once you have one, you kind of just discard the rest of them. As for the deck list featured, the Bastion list was by Hitode, which was the 3rd place team in the Kyushu Cup, and the Thegria list was by Koyomi, who was top 8 in the Amagasaki Cup. Moving forward to our second last nation, because we'll be looking at Lyrical after this, is going to be Stoicheia, and we have quite a bit of Stoicheia to show today, because of course Leonor is here, but Grade 3 Magnolia got some cool support in this set too, and this list is coming from the Hiroshima Championship 1st place, which is by Hal. So the newest addition is Arupin. So this card is really cool because it basically gets a really big power up when it swings, because if you have for every 2 grade 2 or greater units on your board, it gets plus 5k, and then if you give it plus 10k or more power, you can bind it in order to countercharge 1 Soul Charge 1, which is a resource that Magnolia didn't really have as easy access to in the past. So being able to just countercharge and use stuff, you know, on top of that is also very good. The other new addition is the Seroru. So this is the card that when placed on rear lets you soul boss 1 to look at top 5 for a Magnolia card and add it to your hand. And then also says when your grade 3 Magnolia is your Vanguard, when you would Persona Ride, the power up also goes to your back row, which is really huge because Persona Ride enables your entire back row to attack. So that makes every attack swing for big numbers, and that makes this deck pretty scary. And of course we see 4 inlet pulls in this deck too, which is pretty good because at this time inlet pulls was still restricted with Magnolia Elder, so this is also very nice because it lets you use it before it gets unrestricted. And there's also the addition of the 2 Araserisu, so she's the basically kind of like recycler for your Persona Rides from your drop zone, which is also quite good, and she's one of the triple rares of the set with fantastic Fujichoko art. The next Magnolia variant is a Magnolia Elder form. So this Elder variant is pretty interesting because again, you are choice restricted from playing inlet, which is quite annoying, but you are still playing the Arupin for the counter charge and soul charge, which is of course very much appreciated. Lets you high roll into some good cards to call off of the Magnolia Elder when you ride it. Some aggressive pieces, you know, we see the Irenia or Ilenia in English, which is also very nice. The new order is seen here as well from set 6, which basically lets you look at top 3, discard 1, and then choose a card from your drop that is equal to or lower grade than your Vanguard and call it. And then the interesting addition of the Clapping Dragon to basically get the extra power and draw if you call it from hand. So the deck isn't as strong as it used to be in its prime with Elder, but it is slowly getting back to that now that, you know, Elder and Inlet will no longer be choice restricted. And so this Magnolia Elder list is by Alice, who came 4th in the Hiroshima Championship. And it's actually a friend of mine, so pretty cool to see them succeed. And up next, we're going to take a look at a couple Leonorn lists, just like we did for Jiva as well as for Youthberk. Sorry, Dredjeweled, the 2 lists of Dredjeweled that topped sadly are the exact same. But these 2 Leonor lists are very different from each other. The kind of thing they share is, of course, they're playing 4 of the Resonance Dragon, which lets you restand your rear guards, which is really important. This has been the biggest buff to the deck possible, but only running 4 Persona Rides and then using 4 Creed Assaults as like the main thing you want to restand with Resonance Dragon. And then, of course, we have the Dianza to keep reviving your good attackers like the Creed Assault, some token generation, and then the interesting addition of the Urgula together with the Kusi to make big boosters. And I'm guessing like you just don't, I'm not sure if this list wants to like boost early and then restand, or if it uses the Kusi as an attacker more often. And Urgula is also an interesting card in the meta, of course, because if you put it behind the Vanguard, it makes so that your Vanguard cannot be targeted by things like Dredjewel's effect, which is pretty cool if you have a lot of Dredjeweled in your locals. But the Leonorn list that I'm more of a fan of is the second we're going to show, which is by Hororo from the Miyako Cup that got top 8. The first one we showed was from Onigiriya, who got 3rd place in the Hiroshima Championship. So Hororo's list is what is kind of called the Miltai Leonorn. So this is, there's a really in-depth article about Leonorn that was written by a player and TO called Miltai. And so basically this one just focuses on using Clapping Dragon to draw extra cards and using all of your Persona Rides, while also, you know, deploying the TD Leonorn as a strong attacker because she gets the plus 5k power bonus on her own on rear. But you're using Clapping Dragon together with her and Resonance Dragon to restand them, and then you have your token generators as well as Dianza to keep reviving your Resonance Dragon in order to keep doing the restands. And then just 2 copies of the double rare from set 5, which just lets you convert some of your kind of like dead rears or like the tokens that you have that you made from the grade 1 that you don't need anymore for a card draw as well as some extra power. And then we saw Blue Zorga succeed, which was built by Izumo and got 1st place at the Kyushu Cup. And let me tell you, Blue Zorga has been pretty good. Like I've been running into this list during the set 7 meta a fair bit. I'm not a Zorga extraordinaire, but being able to, you know, just bounce stuff to your hand and like add good cards back to your hand thanks to Shadow Cloak, as well as, you know, the classic Zorga ability is pretty good, while also just developing really strong boards with big numbers, you know, thanks to the orders and Alchemagic. As a result, is always going to be very strong. So for the Blue Zorga enthusiasts, here is finally a list for you. And finally, we have Flagberg. So this Flagberg was built by my good friend Answerer. I posted a picture the other day where I got top 8 at the Trail Grand Championship, and the person underneath me is actually Answerer. So he got first place at the Dokovan Cup. So this is the tournament organized by the Thursday stream by Knack, and he is kind of the aficionado for Aquaforce for as long as the game's been out, for as long as Aquaforce has existed. And of course, in D era, he's playing Flagberg and Maelstrom now as well. So he's kind of the go-to for Flagberg lists in Japan here. And he was trying out quite a few of the new cards. There are some things that maybe even I find a little bit weird. So he's running one copy of the Rousing Breath Dragon. So this is the kind of like middle back row rearguard circle thing that makes it so that you don't have to counterblast 1 for your Flagberg, that I guess you can go into when you don't have the Shelling Cannon. One copy of the Ryuka, so this is the thing that pops itself to give a rearguard plus 10k. So of course your restanding rear is already very powerful and scary, but now this makes them even more scary. And then the best part, of course, is the 4 copies of the Tier Knight Alex. So she is the restanding rear that allows you to make 6 attacks consistently, even without Shelling Cannon, with, just things like your Ascendance Assault, your Inlet Pulse, as well as herself. So this is a really strong addition to the deck and has made it even better than before. And finally, we're going to go through some of the Lyrical Monasterio decks that have been doing quite well. I know we featured some of them in the set 6 meta, but I want to take a look at some of the ones that did find some success, because the meta has changed a fair bit, from the Kairi times. First one we're going to take a look at is Kyoka, which was run by Mikurun, who got 4th in the Sapporo Fighters League. Kyoka is a really strong aggro deck in my opinion. A friend of mine, Jason, does play the deck quite a bit. Yuka does make it stronger though, so that's pretty important to keep in mind, but you basically have really strong attackers that restand with the power up with the Lyrical Shooting Stars, and the main restander they use is the Arche. She's the one that looks like Hatsune Miku basically. So she restands, she gets powered up, you countercharge, you get a bunch of resources with this deck. So if you want to play a more aggressive deck for Lyrical Monasterio or just for Vanguard in general, then this is going to be the one. Up next, this is going to be a deck that has been finding a lot of success lately in like Deer Days and in the West, and also a bit in Japan too, which is Rebi's Fortia that came 2nd at the Hiroshima Championship. So Fortia is just Dragonic Overlord, the waifu, I guess, the dog. But this deck is pretty cool. I mean, it's the original Friends archetype, so Friends are, so good that they're used in other decks as an engine. So, you're drawing off your melties and you're getting all the big power from all of your rears, and on top of that you have Yuika in here to recycle all those on-place effects as well. And so honestly, the deck is really good because it uses one of the best engines that Lyrical Monasterio has, with a restanding Vanguard, which of course has a lot of pressure, especially in this kind of trigger lineup. But actually this runs 7 crit 4 draw, so I actually expected 8 crit when I first saw this deck, but I guess you still need to draw into those pieces if you don't find your melties. Up next is Michu, which was 3rd place in Amagasaki Cup, played by Rock. Michu is really strong. This is a deck that can really just command the tempo of a game. You're powering up your board by giving plus 10k to 3 units, and then you get 2 Vanguard swings by swapping into the Nokono from behind the Vanguard. This deck will get a second wind of popularity when the set 8 comes out, because you get a reprint of the Michu deck, basically, the Ride Line plus Nokono through the Hololive collab. Definitely been seeing a lot more of this deck in the set 8 meta, so it's really good. It's cheap, it doesn't play Yuika, it's honestly very affordable to build, especially this variant that we're showing right now. So if you want a cheap and really fun Lyrical Monasterio deck to play, then this is definitely the one. And finally, we have another Overlord variant, which is Lutetia. This was played by Buran, who got 3rd place in the Gunmai Championship, and they've been seeing a lot of success with this deck through the WGP season, and Lutetia in general has been doing very good, quite even in the English format, I think. And this is a very maxed out version of it, so you've got the restanding Vanguard that is Lutetia, and then her very strong rearguard that lets you set up Soul, of course, for Lutetia herself, and is a very strong, powerful attacker on the rear. Runs 4 copies of the Aura. So Aura is a card that lets you search for any order card from your deck if her boosted attack hits. So this lets you search for the Blitz Order PG, and in the future there's going to be the Chalice that lets you Persona Ride if you didn't ride that turn. So this is also going to be really good in that edition as well. And of course, this deck also has one of the best Blitz Orders in the game that gives you a defensive out while setting up for your Vanguard restand on other turns. And so that is it. Those are the decks that I wanted to feature for the set 7 meta. Sorry that this took so long to get out. I'll do a deck profile, not sure if it might already be up by this point or if it's going to go up after this, on Youthberk in set 7 in general, because it's a deck that has a lot of flexibility, and well, I've had Ayrton, my friend, borrowing the deck and seeing a lot of success with it, getting top 8 in WGB Tokyo, and it was a deck that I used quite a lot when the set came out myself as well. So I definitely recommend it if you have picked up parts, because Youthberk is just super strong. But set 7 isn't all just Youthberk. As we showed in this video, there's a lot of other decks that have a lot of success in this meta too. Keep in mind that in Japan, the WGB season was a team tournament, so all these decks are part of team tournaments, and whether they got carried or not is a different story, and unfortunately we do not have the data to show whether that is the case or not. But the decks I picked out are all quite interesting and I think worth taking a look at. In the future, we'll be taking a look at, of course, all the decks of set 7 in general, so including some of the not so good ones, such as, you know, of course, Welstra, and then we're going to be focusing more on set 8 content going forward, because I've been really enjoying the new meta. Decks like Minerva and Luki are also really good, and stuff that got supported like Eva and Tamayuta are also doing really well in the new format. But anyway, if you like this video, please do give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. These videos do take quite a bit to make, so I really do appreciate your patience as well as your support for them. But otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.